the Detroit Pistons are one of the most storied franchises in NBA history, with the likes of Isaiah Thomas, Grant Hill, Dennis Rodman, Ben Wallace, and even a short stint of Allen Iverson being some of the greatest players in NBA history to play for this team. The team has been a joke over the last decade or two, with only 2 playoff appearances in the last 12 years and few All-Stars to account for. This team has been struggling desperately, but after the worst record in the NBA last season, it looks like things might just be taking a turn for the better. Can Cade Cunningham's return get this team back on top?
Oklahoma State and Cade Cunningham. In his collegiate debut, he drops in 21 points, 10 rebounds for a double-double, and Oklahoma State wins it 75-68.
This will make headlines. Oregon State is going to the Sweet 16.
I mean, it's been special. I think that's the best way to describe it. You know, I think the biggest thing is I surrounded myself around great people more than anything. And that's the thing I'm most proud of. And that's the thing that, you know, I feel like I've grown the most by just being around good people that, you know, push me to be somebody good on the court and off the court.
Cade Cunningham, why is he that consensus #1?
So Cade Cunningham is really the classic modern-day point guard. When we think about size, 6'8", 220, he has a really good stop-and-pop game. His pick-and-roll floater is very good. He has got that size and strength to finish, and obviously extremely unselfish as well. So Cade Cunningham, from the full package standpoint of manipulating pick-and-roll in the half court, which you need in the playoffs, as we saw, he has it.
So who's the comp? He's good. If he goes #1 overall, who's the comp in the NBA right now or ever?
Well, I see Luka Doncic. I see a lot of that. Unselfish, same size, similar length. Pedigree for Cade Cunningham is elite. You know, when we think about Doncic, he was 18. He wins the EuroLeague MVP. That will never happen again. Cade Cunningham has been the #1 player in his draft class for the last 3 years.
With the first pick in the 2021 NBA draft, the Detroit Pistons select Cade Cunningham.
Cade Cunningham and Jalen Green faced off in last night's Summer League matchup between the Rockets and Pistons. Green, the #2 pick, posted a 25.5 rebound performance in the win, while Cunningham finished with 20 points and 3 steals. So, Shannon, who won the individual battle here?
Well, Skip, Jalen Green had an outstanding performance, and his team won, so I would have to give the edge to him. But both of these guys were extremely impressive last night. The thing that I found most impressive about Jalen Green, he attempted 11 free throws, Skip. And he got range. He got bounce. He's athletic. And I understand that him saying I should have been a #1 pick. But Cade Cunningham showed me some things, Skip. The way he was shooting the 3, and he's a heck of a on-ball defender because he was just swiping it. So I was impressed with both of the guys. But to answer Jenny's question, I'm going to give the edge to Green because, man, I think Houston got something.
Who do you think's going to be the better pro, Cade or Jalen?
Me personally, I think Jalen. That's not to throw any shade on Cade Cunningham. What I see in Cunningham is a smooth operator that just knows how to play the game and is going to know how to be effective and productive and is going to be a plus for the Detroit Pistons. I see a guy in Jalen Green that seems to have a little something extra that you don't teach.
The MVP of the Clorox Rising Stars is Cade Cunningham.
Toronto, let's hear it one more time for Scotty Barnes, the 2022 Kia NBA Rookie of the Year!
Cade Cunningham finished 3rd in Rookie of the Year voting, but when it comes to the NBA's all-rookie team, no doubt about it for the Pistons' top pick. He was a unanimous choice for the first team. Cunningham joining Scotty Barnes and Evan Mobley as unanimous first-teamers. Barnes was Rookie of the Year. Mobley was 2nd in that vote. The global panel of sports writers and broadcasters had Cunningham on all 100 of the ballots. The #1 overall pick led all rookies with 17 points per game and was 2nd in assists, averaging 5 a game.
Pistons fans have hope, perhaps the most real hope they've had in a long time. After drafting Jaden Ivey 5th overall in this year's draft, followed by the #1 overall pick last year, Cade Cunningham, Pistons fans think, even if it's not fully our year, we have the potential to be damn good. Pistons have only made it to the postseason twice in the past 12 years. They have not won a playoff game since 2008.
We've got breaking news out of the NBA where Pistons guard Cade Cunningham is feared to have suffered a stress fracture in his right shin. That's according to The Athletic. Cunningham is reportedly mulling over options, including surgery, which would knock him out indefinitely. The former #1 overall pick hasn't taken the court for the Pistons in nearly 2 weeks.
I feel most bad for Cade that he was unable to take a step forward in his career this year. Clearly bothered by that, even when he was playing. I wish him a speedy and healthy recovery. But there is a silver lining in all of this.
Yeah?
They have a better chance to have the worst record in the league and get Victor Wembanyama. It also gives them a chance to put the ball in Jaden Ivey's hand, to give Killian Hayes more time on the ball. And this could end up being a positive if Cade Cunningham comes back healthy.
The Pistons had dreams to win the draft lottery again and a chance to win the rights to draft Victor Wembanyama first overall. Very quickly, too quickly into the night, they found out their lottery hopes and dreams were crushed.
The 5th pick will be made by the Detroit Pistons.
5th, wow. The worst possible outcome. Ben Wallace in Chicago, stunned and bummed. The San Antonio Spurs winning the top spot.
Give it up for the Thompson family. Amen and Ausar Thompson go back-to-back. Amen to Houston, Ausar to Detroit with the 5th overall selection. Ausar holds the overtime elite single-game blocks record with 7, which he recorded twice. Both Amen and Ausar had 7-foot wingspans at the draft combine, tied for the longest among shooting guards. The first pair of brothers to go top 5 in the same NBA draft.
Cade Cunningham is back and looks really good. Being out here at Team USA camp, seeing him both Friday and Saturday in the scrimmages that the select team played against the senior national team, he looked great and looked like a guy that could have easily been on the senior national team, if not for the fact that he was dealing with the stress fracture. He hadn't played all last year, and I think they wanted to make sure he ramped up properly for the season. But they had him in a Luka Doncic type role on Friday during the scrimmages. Cade Cunningham is essentially the same size as Luka. They had him playing the same way, and he was tearing Team USA apart. He was getting Jalen Brunson in the post, doing whatever he wanted. He was hitting Jalen Duran for layups and dunks. He was able to get wherever he wanted on the court. And that was the case on Saturday, even when the senior national team throttled the select team. But Cade looked really good. And if I'm a Pistons fan, seeing him bulked up, but not in a heavy way, just bigger and stronger, getting where he wanted on the court, he's got a chance to have a really nice year for them this year. And it was just a reminder that this guy who was sort of out of our mind this past year because he wasn't on the court is still very much in play in Detroit. And I think he's got a chance to be very, very good.
Camera I'm looking at, I'm in this one.
Yeah, you're in this one right here.
Detroit, I'm all the way in. Detroit Pistons, I'm all the way in. Let's do it.
DJ Jones.
Back to Cade. Good feed.
Cunningham, the spin, leaves it off. Stewart, the dunk.
A minute 10 to go. Cunningham has been on fire in this second.
Yo, what is up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of NBA Now. It's your boy Dom, and we're going to get right into things here today. Now, obviously, today we are going to be talking about Cade Cunningham and the Detroit Pistons. But before we can get into what they do next season, we have to talk about last season, which I'm sure a lot of Detroit fans don't want to talk about. But last season was so bad for this team. Obviously, Cade was injured, and I think that's a big reason why a lot of people are really criminally underrating him. But this team only won 17 games. They were by far the worst team in the NBA. They should have probably got Victor Wembanyama, but they had the worst lottery luck, falling from 1 to 5, the worst case scenario they could have had. And they ended up drafting Ausar Thompson, who we'll talk about here a little bit more in a minute. But this team was awful last year, but what can you expect? Killian Hayes was your starting point guard. What you can really hope for is improvements this next season with a starting point guard of Cade Cunningham. Headed into year 3, it looks like Cade might just be better than ever after a great performance from the Team USA Select team against the Team USA team that's competing in FIBA right now, and I think only has 1 loss at this point, but they're still, moving on. And before that, they were undefeated. The likes of Anthony Edwards, Brandon Ingram, and many other stars that cover lots of other teams across the league. Cade went in there and just kicked their butt and made them look like they're bad, right? So everybody needs to remember, this guy's a dog. He was drafted #1 overall for a reason. He had the Luka comparisons. He had the LeBron comparisons. He had that level of hype. And for some reason, because he had 1 injured season, we are all forgetting about him. Even though, and I like both of these players. I like Cade and I like Zion. Everybody's still talking about Zion, but nobody's talking about Cade. Now, Zion's had some more regular season success, but he's also had longer in the league, right? And I think, yeah, everybody's forgetting about Cade Cunningham. Obviously, I mean, he was dominant in high school when he played at Montverde. Had COVID not been a thing, most people thought he was probably going to go win a national championship there as it pertains to high school. Then he goes to Oklahoma State, was phenomenal, had him in the 4th seed. I honestly thought they were about to have like a crazy run throughout the NCAA tournament or March Madness, whatever you want to call it. They end up getting knocked out in the 2nd round. He goes to the NBA draft, still goes number 1 overall because he's a dog. Like, let's not play around. Cade Cunningham went number 1 for a reason, is a unanimous first-team All-NBA selection. Only really loses out on Rookie of the Year because Scottie Barnes kind of came out of nowhere and had an amazing rookie season for a Toronto Raptors team. And then Evan Mobley was probably the best defensive rookie of the last 10 years. I don't even know. I mean, personally, I would have given Evan Mobley Rookie of the Year, and Cade would have been 3rd for me. But, you know, as Cade was 3rd for the actual voting, but Cade was really, really good. He led all rookies in assists. He was 2nd in assists, led them all in scoring. He was very, very good. And they were a much better team his rookie season than this last season, in which they didn't really have Cade. So that's something that you have to consider, is this team was probably worse his rookie season because they ended up with the number 1 pick. And somehow he had led them to a better record than they were able to accomplish this last season without him, right? Something to consider. But yeah, I mean, he was really, really good. Won Rising Stars MVP that season, was a unanimous all rookie first team selection. And unfortunately, last year he got injured. Now, it didn't look in the first few games that he played that he was going to be much better than he'd been. You know, last season he averaged 19 points per game. In the 12 games he played, he shot about the same from the field at 41%, a little worse from 3 at 27%, and about the same from the free throw line at 83%. There wasn't much change in any other statistical categories. Averaged a little bit more assists, a little bit more rebounds, averaged less steals, less blocks. So relatively similar to where he was his rookie season. But I don't know. I just thought he was going to take such a big jump. He gets injured. It really sucks for this team. We saw how much it hurt him last year, like I said, becoming one of the worst teams in the NBA. Well, not just one of the worst teams, the worst team in the NBA. But now, after this offseason, there's reports that he's fully healthy. It looks like he should be able to kind of overcome this injury, especially if he's playing that well against the other young stars in the league. Just the report recently was his lower leg is fully recovered from the season-ending shin surgery, say that 10 times fast, that he underwent in December, and he obviously practiced against Team USA ahead of the World Cup via Adrian Wojnarowski. Shout out Woj. But yeah, I mean, I think this year, after a long time to rehab that injury, right, he's going to come into the season. He's got some more help around him, who we're going to get into here in a second. And I think he will be able to have potentially a breakout season in which this guy could go for an all-star team. It's not impossible for him to get an all-star team. When you look at the East, Jalen Brunson, who's never been an all-star as well, might be the best point guard in the Eastern Conference. And so why, if Cade Cunningham gets his team to the play-in potentially, could he not be an all-star? Now, personally, I don't think they will be in the play-in. I think this team is probably one more year away from kind of making that jump to getting a little bit more playoff experience, and then we'll see what happens from there. But I do think they will not be the worst team in the NBA this season. I think the Charlotte Hornets are lining up at the door to do that. That team is really, really bad. But yeah, I think Cade Cunningham should be huge for this team this year, should be able to make a jump. The biggest thing I'm looking at is, can we get a little bit more translation from his three-point shot? He shot it at a high volume ever since getting into the NBA at over 5 attempts per game, but it hasn't quite translated from what it was in college. Now, I don't have his college stats on three-point shooting on hand, but he shot it. I felt like he shot it better in college. He definitely, had his games where he was just 7 or 8 straight and just knocking them down. He's very good in the mid-range. So I'd like to see his efficiency from 3 really increase, and I think that it could be huge for his game. But I think that also might help with having some more guys around him, because he's not going to be forced into the toughest three-point shots of all time, right? It's not going to be, hey, Cade Cunningham is literally the only NBA player on this team. Let's just play against him. And the rest of the guys are G League players, right? He's got some talent around him now, which I think should be huge. Speaking of the talent around him, let's take a look at it. I think there is definitely a number of guys that can kind of help him out. I think the number one guy you're going to think of is Jaden Ivey. Jaden Ivey last year in his rookie season was super, super solid. Averaged 16 points per game, 41% from the field, 34% from three. Put his name in the Rookie of the Year conversation, was the 5th overall pick. And I think, did a good job kind of taking that load after Cade went down and kind of being this team's star last season, right? He started 73 to 74 games he played. He has the, size that he can develop into a little bit of a better defender. And yeah, I think, he's going to be a great secondary option next to Cade. I know a lot of people are wondering, will he be a point guard? Will he be a shooting guard? Look, it doesn't really matter. They're both big enough that, defensively, you're going to be able to match up. Jaden Ivey's like 6'4", 6'5". Cade's like 6'7", 6'8". So defensively, there should be no worries, especially with a guy like Ausar playing the 3, who we'll get into in a minute. But yeah, I think these two are going to be a really, really dynamic punch at the 1 and 2. And I'm going to really be excited to see this play out for a whole season, right? But then you get into Ausar Thompson, right? Drafted 5th overall this last season, and we'll see what he can do. I think he's got a lot of defensive potential. He's not the playmaker that his brother is, which is why his brother went earlier to Houston, but I think he's got a lot of defensive potential. I'm maybe not as high on the Thompson Twins as a lot of people are, at least offensively, but I do think that they are going to be phenomenal defensive guys. 6'7", 215. He can block shots, he can steal the ball, he can match up with a lot of, perimeter players, and I think he'll be huge for this team defensively, which they're going to need. You got to be able to play defense to stop some of these elite offensive players in today's game. Past that, I think Jalen Duran was a standout last year for this team. I think he's only going to get better. He was the youngest player in the league last year. He averaged 9 points per game. He shot at 64% from the field. He was able to get himself almost 9 rebounds a game and almost a block per game as well. And I think he's shown progression. I mean, especially watching him in a little bit of summer league play. And then when he was playing with Cade on that select team versus the Team USA team, he also was playing very well. The pick and roll between them was working super, super well. I think the spacing helped a lot there, which we'll talk about spacing for this team here in a minute. But yeah, I think Jalen Duran should be the center for this team going forward. Was the 13th overall pick last season, and through a series of trades ended up in Detroit. And I think it was a really, really good pickup for them because he might have been the youngest player in the NBA last year, but he was not even close to the worst player, and he deserves to be a starting center in this league, in my opinion. So Jalen Duran's ceiling is only going to go up. I mean, I want to say Jalen Duran is younger than Ausar Thompson. Yeah, Ausar Thompson is pretty much a whole year older than Jalen Duran, and Jalen Duran's already been in the league for a year. So that's something to consider. He's essentially a rookie with a year of experience in the NBA, right, this next season. And he will be the next year because he doesn't even turn 20 until like the end of this season. So yeah, shout out to Jalen Duran. I think he's going to be very, very good for this team. The last kind of core piece that I'm really looking at for this team when it comes to young guys is Isaiah Stewart. Isaiah Stewart, Beef Stew, has been one of the most electric players for this team over the past few years. Actually, I heard this stat on the Through the Wire podcast, was the first rookie from the Detroit Pistons to get an extension in like 20 years. Like, not even Andre Drummond had done it. Like, he kind of broke a mold that obviously Cade would have broke eventually, but it's kind of cool that Isaiah Stewart has done it because he's been super good for this team. He kind of brings that Detroit energy, right? I think obviously everybody thinks about him and thinks about that clip where he's trying to chase down LeBron and he's mauling security and mauling past all of his teammates and he's bleeding from his face and everything. He definitely brings that Detroit dog to this team and kind of is a big identity setter, almost like a Marcus Smart for this team. So I think he's going to be really good for him. He actually has improved his ability to, kind of stretch the three-pointer out. Earlier in his career, he did not shoot a lot. He was primarily playing the center his first 2 seasons, not even taking 1 3-point attempt per game. Although shooting him relatively right below league average, this year kept exact same volume at pretty much 32.7% and upped it to 4 attempts per game, was able to stretch it out, sit in the corner a little bit, only played 50 games, but upped his points per game, upped his rebounds, or relatively stayed the same from a rebounds per game perspective, and was kind of able to stretch it out, play a little bit more power forward. At 6'8", I think that's great. I think he fits alongside, Jalen Duran really well. He is able to kind of bring that defensive tenacity. And so between Ausar Thompson, Isaiah Stewart, and Jalen Duran, that would be my front court if I was the Detroit Pistons head coach. I would roll super young in the lineup. I'd go Cade, Jaden Ivey, Ausar Thompson, Isaiah Stewart, and Jalen Duran. Let the young guys go out there, get the experience, play together, and just keep working their butts off, right? Then it comes to the bench unit. Now, I don't think that's necessarily what the starters will be. We'll get into that in a second, but that's what I would do. Then it comes to the bench unit and kind of the big question marks of this team. The big question marks are obviously Killian Hayes, who at this point, I think it's fair to say that he's a bust. He's had 3 years of his career. He was drafted 7th overall. I thought he had a lot of potential when he goes to Detroit. I think them getting the number 1 overall pick in Cade kind of really hurt Killian Hayes' career projection. But this last season, he had an opportunity with Cade out for pretty much the whole season to, kind of make something of himself and be a little bit better. But instead, his shooting efficiency was still terrible. Shot under 30% from 3, shot under 40% from the field. He did average more points per game, more assists, and a little bit more steals. And he's a solid enough defender. But I do think at this point, he's kind of in that Frank Ntilikina, Dennis Smith Jr. role of guys that were just probably taken higher than they should have and never developed into the player that we maybe thought. Now, could Killian Hayes still carve out a long career in the NBA? Absolutely. But I do think at this point, if you're Detroit, you kind of are giving up on Killian Hayes, which I don't think is a bad thing from a franchise perspective, considering all those young guys we've already listed off. Past that, though, comes to the big man situation. So obviously we talked about Isaiah Stewart and Jalen Duran and how much I think that they fit this team very well, and in Jalen Duran's perspective, have a lot of potential to become one of the better bigs in the NBA, especially just due to his age and how much longer he has to develop, right? And how good he is already. Then it comes to a guy like Marvin Bagley, who's on this team. Marvin Bagley was the 2nd overall pick for the Sacramento Kings, and again, is one of those guys that hasn't necessarily been who we thought he was going to be. He was drafted over Luka Doncic. He was drafted over Trae Young. He was drafted over Mikal Bridges. I think Mikal was in that draft. If he wasn't, I guess I'm going to get a lot of hate in the comments. But yeah, Marvin Bagley, he was supposed to be a dog, man. He was supposed to be a dog. He was drafted at 19 years old, goes to Sacramento, doesn't really want to play the center role, and doesn't quite have the three-point shot to be the greatest power forward in today's game. Ends up averaging about 14 for his career in Sacramento, gets to Detroit this last season, plays about 42 games with them, averages 12 points per game, and is solid as a center, but he's not very good defensively. He can't stretch the floor enough to play the 4. And so really, he's kind of the modern-day Jahlil Okafor, maybe a big that was a little bit overhyped and is probably never going to reach his potential to, be that number 2 overall pick, which I don't think is bad. We'll see if he can carve out a longer career, but I don't think Detroit should start him, and I don't think that he will be on Detroit for much longer, because at this point, he's 24 years old, going on 25. And although he still kind of fits a timetable of this team, unless he improves majorly defensively or on his shot, he's probably going to have to bounce around the team a little bit before he kind of really forces himself and looks in the mirror and makes that improvement. And if he doesn't, his career will probably only be a few more seasons, which is sad to say because this guy had a lot of potential. Then it comes to James Wiseman, another top pick. He also was the number 2 overall pick just a few years ago to the Golden State Warriors, a guy that I thought had tons of potential, along the similar to the likes of a guy like Chet Holmgren, who we'll see how he does this next season in his rookie year. And I thought James Wiseman was kind of going to go James Wiseman as the next, major, really good big to enter the league, then Chet, then Vic. And I thought we were going to have a lot of, really good bigs enter the league back to back to back. But Wiseman doesn't quite live up to that potential. What we saw in Golden State was he just wasn't able to kind of fit in there. He gets to Detroit this last season, plays about 24 games with them, averages 12 points, which was the most on his career, averages almost a block per game. He shoots at about 53% from the field and gets about 8 rebounds per game, which is his best rebounding season by far, but was kind of traded for a bag of chips. We'll see what he develops into. I think they're going to try to play James Wiseman and Jalen Duran in the starting lineup together as some sort of a Twin Towers duo. And I just don't think it's going to work. I don't think either of them have the three-point capability to make it work. So I would really like to see them bring James Wiseman off the bench as a 6th man big. He's only 22 years old. He still has a lot of time and potential to improve. I have more faith in, can still reach some of that potential than I do with Marvin Bagley, just because he really kind of got thrust into a situation where, it was the last piece the Warriors needed was the center, but, he was a rookie getting thrust into a very complex offense in which he wasn't really going to be a focus as a number 2 overall pick, and he was expected to win right away. And so because Kevon Looney was able to provide winning minutes, he kind of got the starts. Then you get the center controversy, ends up missing a year, then he gets traded to Detroit, is somewhat okay there, but he's also kind of competing with rookie Jalen Duran. So how much longer he'll stay in Detroit, I'm not sure, but I do still have hope for James Wiseman to be a top 15 center in this league. I think the best thing for the Pistons to do would be to bring him off the bench behind Jalen Duran, and maybe, if Jalen Duran's kind of injured or something, James Wiseman gets a starting position. I think Cade's playmaking should help him a lot. I think a lot of the perimeter scoring that this team has should help him a lot. And off the bench, I think a guy like Monte Morris should help him a lot. This team has good vets off the bench, which could provide a lot of opportunity for James Wiseman, and he's kind of away from the spotlights where maybe he can kind of make the most of that opportunity. But yeah, this team ended up picking up Monte Morris, which completely flew over my head. I didn't realize it until I was watching a YouTube video and they mentioned it. I thought he was still in the Wizards, so I don't even know how he got there. But they picked up Monte Morris for cheap. Has been a very, very serviceable point guard throughout his career. Had a little bit of a down year last year in Washington, but as a Nuggets fan, I vouch for Monte as being probably the best backup point guard in the league. It's either him or Tyus Jones. And so, yeah, I think he's going to be really good for this team and going to provide a lot of stability as a backup point guard and playmaking, which is a big reason why I think Killian Hayes is probably knocking on the door at the end of his Pistons days, or at least minutes, especially if this team is going to try to improve and push toward the playoff appearance. Then you get a guy like Alec Burks. He's a scorer that can kind of come off the bench. He's, shown the ability to be a good scorer for different teams, whether it was his run in New York, whether it was his time with Golden State. He's been a good player in the league, especially over the last 5 or 6 years, where he's been with a number of different teams and been able to average upwards of 16 points per game. Last year, he averaged 12 for this team on 51 games played, and I think will continue to be a decent bench veteran for this team. Beyond that, you have some shooters. You have Bojan Bogdanovic, he averaged 21 points per game last season. I could see him getting moved. He's still on a pretty big contract and could be serviceable to a winning team at 33 years old. But he averaged 21 last season, was a career high in points per game, shot 41% from three, which was, phenomenal. Shot 48% from the field. He can rebound the ball okay for his position at about 4 rebounds per game. He's not a great defender like he was back in Indiana, but I do think he's going to be a good shooter, a decent defender, and a good veteran presence for this team as well, especially off the bench. So I think this team does have some depth as it goes for kind of backing up those youthful players, in which, like I said, I would go with the youth movement, put them in the starting lineup, throw them to the Wolves, and let them respond, and then have these vets kind of to come off the bench, stabilize things, talk it through with them, and kind of be there for those questions and those lows that this team might have, right? Joe Harris, though, gets traded to this team from Brooklyn, one of the best shooters in the league, one of the best shooters probably of all time as a spot-up guy. He shot upwards of 47% in his career. Last year had a little bit of a down year as it goes for Joe Harris, shooting only 42% from three. The Nets had a wild fiasco going on there, but he's 31 years old, going on 32, and I think will provide really, really good shooting for this team and a good veteran presence off the bench. So that's something that you kind of see throughout a lot of this team is a good veteran presence off the bench, decent shooting, and a lot of young potential. With that said, I'm super excited to see what the Detroit Pistons do this year. Do you guys think that Cade Cunningham can be an all-star? Do you think this team will make the play-in? Or do you think this team will be competing for the number 1 overall pick yet again? Let me know in the comments down below. That's going to be it from me, and I'll catch y'all next time. Peace out, guys.
Yo, bro.
What's that?
I can sing and dance, but for real, though, I can't wait to see you at draft night, Daddy.
Come on,
I can't wait to see you at draft night, Daddy. Yeah, bro. I hope you gonna know.
How I get him out? Come on, bro.